And that is where this red color space, this represents shortage, or this is having excess demand. Okay? So mathematically, the value of PE star and the QE star can be derived. So how is it done? Okay, based on the criteria where QD is equal to QS, we'll just simply equate. To solve for this, having these equations, to solve for the value of equilibrium price P at that point and equilibrium quantity, we need this equation. So, that is the value of demand, that is 50 minus 5P. This will be equal to 10 plus 5P. Combining like terms through transposition method, this becomes 50 minus 10 equal to 5P. This will become positive. This is positive plus P, such that the PE star now will be equal to 40 over 10, or that is equal to 4. Okay? So that is how this PE star now. So how do we solve for the QE star? We just simply substitute the price obtained in any of the two equations. So let us say we use first demand. So if the price is 4, so that becomes 10 plus the 5 times the PE star. So this will become the QE star. That is equal to 10 plus 5 times 4. So that is equal to 30. QE star will now be 30. And using the demand equation, that becomes 50 minus 5 times the PE star. So that is equal to 50 minus 5 times 4. Then the QE star on the demand equation is equal to 30. And the two values for demand and supply should be equal because they are in the state of balance. Otherwise, there is something wrong with your solution, or there is something wrong with the way you compute. Okay, so this is now where QE equal to equilibrium quantity is 30 and the equilibrium price is 10, having these two equations. Okay, so that is for market equilibrium. However, again, we are now looking forward. How will can this market equilibrium happen also to change? Because we said that they are now in equilibrium, can they still change? Of course, they can change. Why? Not with government intervention, but only between or because of the interaction between the forces of demand and supply. Remember that demand could shift to the right or shift to the left, while supply can also shift to the left or shift to the right. Suppose we have a situation wherein there is this market equilibrium happening already. So we have established equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. However, situations in the market changes. Let us say that suppose there is only a force affecting demand and it did not affect supply. The question now is what happens to the equilibrium quantity and what happens to the equilibrium price. Okay, suppose there will be movements of the demand or the supply. So we look at it. Suppose there is increase in demand. Remember that population is always on the rise. Let us say those rice eaters, during the time that there is still no harvest, still demand is high. let us say that becomes now D prime. While supply did not change because there is still no harvest yet. So, meaning, when demand increases, okay, let us say there is a situation, when demand increases, however, supply is constant. The question is, what happens to the equilibrium price and what happens to the equilibrium quantity? So looking at the graph, this now is the new equilibrium point because demand and supply, meaning our PE now becomes PE prime and that is increased. While QE, our equilibrium quantity prime, this is also increased. So meaning, because of this, equilibrium quantity had increased as well as equilibrium price had also increased. Okay? Or suppose the opposite happens. Let us say there is now a market equilibrium condition happening. So we have QE, we have the PE star. So now this time demand is constant, meaning it will not change. And suppose it is now supply that will change. Let us say, so because it's harvest now, supply had increased. So this is our S prime. So there is a new intersection and that will become the new equilibrium price and the new equilibrium quantity. Meaning, if you're going to look at this now, because of an increase in supply while demand is constant, the equilibrium quantity had increased and the equilibrium price had also increased. Okay? Oh. Or let us say both the demand and supply now will move or shift. So suppose we have a situation where there is market equilibrium condition. Always you have to write the initial equilibrium condition. Okay. Suppose it's harvest time, but still a lot of people are getting rice. So, we say that there is a situation that demand increase. There is increase in demand. And there is also an increase in supply because it's harvest. However, the increase in demand is less than the increase in supply. So what happens now to the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? This is now the question. Remember, both the demand curve and the supply curve will not shift. Based on this, the magnitude of the increase or decrease is the space between the curves. So, there is an increase in demand. That is movement, all movements to the right is increase, all movements to the left is decrease. So, we will now draw the new demand curve. Let us say this is now the increase in demand. However, remember, this is the space of the increase in demand, but the increase in supply is greater than the increase in demand. So, let us say this is now, okay, this is bigger space compared to this. So, this is now the new supply and there is now the new intersection. So, equilibrium price had changed and that becomes decreased. While on the other hand, the equilibrium quantity had increased. Okay? So, that is now the result of this situation. So, meaning, the equilibrium price had decreased while the equilibrium quantity had increased. Okay. So, suppose we have another situation. let us say that there is a decrease in demand as well as an increase in supply. But this time, the decrease in demand is equal to the increase in supply. The question still is what happens to the equilibrium quantity and what happens to the equilibrium price. So we'll have to graph now the situation in order for us to determine. There is mathematical calculation in this class, but it will be difficult because we have to graph, or we have to compute for all these points using equations. So to make our life simpler, suppose we'll just have graphs. So we have your Q. First is you're going to draw this initial equilibrium condition. So this is supply, this is demand. So at this point, again, we label the original equilibrium price as well as the original equilibrium quantity. So looking at the given, there is increase in demand, meaning still it is going to the right. So this is now the increase in demand, suppose. While there is this is decrease in demand. Okay. While there is increase in supply. Okay. So you just consider this illustration that this is perfect. So the result here is equilibrium price is constant at this point, for example, while the equilibrium, only the equilibrium quantity had decreased. So equilibrium quantity decreased while equilibrium quantity is constant, while equilibrium price had go down. Okay, so these are now the different situations based on the application of the movements of demand and supply, because we have discussed in our lecture last time that a supply can shift either to the left or to the right because of the factors affecting supply. And on the other hand, we have also the factors affecting demand, which causes movement of the demand curve either to the left or to the right.